Here. Yeah,
Nice.
feeling great.
Awesome. It is Saturday, May 18th at 9:01 a.m.
Thank goodness. I wasn't sure what day or time it
I know,
was.
it's hard to know, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Until I tune into this podcast, I have no
yeah.
idea. Or
I
this,
have
this
this
YouTube thing.
like crazy awesome computer thing that shows me. So, um,
Oh,
Time
yeah, I
goes so
have.
fast though, dude. It goes so fast sometimes. Like I can't believe it's already almost May's almost there. We're like midway through
Oh
May.
my God, I know. Dude, this summer is gonna go so fast. I am like traveling a bunch and the kids only have off school for 2 months now. Like I
Wait,
think
that's
I
it?
remember
I thought it was
literally
like
two
three.
months, June and July, and that's it.
ooh,
Really?
Yeah,
that's
crazy,
brutal.
right? Like I'm
More free
pretty sure.
babysitting, huh?
Yeah. When I was a kid, like I remember it was like at least 3 months.
I thought
Yeah, I
it was
think it
like
was
because
like
it was
June,
July,
July,
August, and
August.
most of September, I thought, or something. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I remember like school started usually early September and we would get off of school like the end of May, early June, something like
But it was still never long enough.
that.
Yeah.
No,
The
no.
last month was always the worst because you knew it was coming. You'd be like, oh man, I only got a month left of this.
Yeah.
This is bad.
It's tough though here because in South Florida it is already 94 degrees every day. So this summer is going to be brutal. Um, but
Yeah, that's warm.
you
It's
know,
been cool up here, all right. I mean, yeah, it is what it is though.
yeah, so you know,
Yeah.
it's summer almost, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's
Doesn't
gonna
change
be
what we're doing though.
nope, just code every day, more coding and coding, and then more
Hmm.
coding after that. But that's awesome.
Hmm.
I love
Then you should
coding.
probably
Hmm.
keep coding after that too.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't love coding, you just shouldn't be in this group, right? Like,
Pretty much.
You
so
shouldn't do something if you don't love it.
yeah. And that's a live stream for today. It's just that's it. We're done.
Yeah.
I love coding. No,
But
Make
we
good
actually
decisions.
have a topic.
we do,
And
we do.
before we get into things, anybody who's watching the live stream, say hi to us down in the comments. If you have any
Mhm.
questions that have been burning in your mind that you wanted to ask us, this is a great time to do it because we can answer your questions live. And then if you have a question that pops up after that question and you're still on the live stream, we're still going, you can ask that question. And if there's even a follow-up one and we don't have other questions lined up, we can answer those questions too. So that's a great reason to tune into live streams and ask your questions down below. Back to you, Russell.
It's a good rule of thumb that if you have questions, just ask them.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say, and if you don't have burning questions and you do have burning desires, we're here for you too. But that's Randall's department. So back to you, Randall.
All right. Yeah, so our topic today is
Oh, you're gonna tell the topic.
back to you, Danny.
Oh
How to
yeah, tell the
learn
topic,
HTML,
Danny.
CSS, JavaScript faster.
Yeah.
Because
So
everybody wants to learn things faster. Nobody wants things to take the
nobody
normal
wants to
amount
learn things slow. Yeah.
of time.
Yeah. I think it's a good topic because learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are essential to understanding web development, but it's one of those sort of catch 22 things. I guess that's not a great word for it, but you got to know it to learn web development, but it's practically never used like in real application, right? Like yes, you use it every single day, but not in its vanilla form,
Yeah.
right? So like you
Yeah.
have to understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to become like a modern day web developer, but all modern day web development is abstracted away from that. So there's like pieces of it in there, but you're not actually coding in
Well,
those.
that is sort of a catch 22, right there, because if you don't
Yeah.
understand it, those that abstraction makes no sense, and you'll struggle way more trying to learn that. So you have to, but you can. I think that's the point, though, right? Because we do most modern web development does abstract from it with all these frameworks and stuff, so that I think there is ways to learn it faster by doing it smart and
Yeah.
not, trying to become like, because you can become a CS, you can do everything with CSS, right? You can become an expert in that, but in some sense, you don't need to anymore because you can move on to these other things that make it easier and faster.
Totally.
Well, it's also an interesting thing that people want to learn stuff faster. So
Yeah.
everything takes the amount of time that it takes. But
Ugh.
we get stuck nowadays where we think we need to do everything faster because we think that somewhere outside of right here and right now, we're going to have happiness, joy, fun, whatever it is we think will give us satisfaction exists out there, and we need to do whatever we're doing to get there faster so that we can have that now. And
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting mind game to realize that you'll never have that now. So
Right.
doing anything faster now is just you're losing the moment now.
Well, you know, and it doesn't help either that everywhere I look, I see learn HTML in 6 hours, learn CSS in 3 minutes or whatever, and then you hear about all these overnight successes that seem like they did nothing and then woke up the next morning and had billions of dollars. And it's like, I feel like I need to move faster.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
Definitely.
that's a very American thing too, where we like idolize these people who are like all of a sudden, oh, all of a
It,
sudden somebody created a company and it's worth billions of dollars, and we just ignore the whole fact that, they had all this opportunity or they spent years like learning something
Well,
or
that's the worst is, did they never tell you about all, like, they always make it sound like it happened overnight, but it's like, you learn out that, oh, they actually created 15 things before this, or they, it's
yeah.
like, if you really look at the story, but yeah, it's all just tales we tell. Sorry.
it's also good to have some perspective because up until Zuckerberg, he was the youngest billionaire. And then before him, it was Bill Gates, who was in his 40s. I think Zuck was like around 18 or something like that. Bill Gates was in his 40s when it happened. And then before him, it was Henry Ford, who was like in his 50s or 60s. So
Yeah.
it wasn't until the early
Pretty soon there's gonna
2000s
be a
where we started to
2-year-old.
see, yeah, right? But I mean, we probably
Trend.
will. It'll be some 2-year-old who
Billionaire
like
at conception. It was amazing.
A
degen buys
TikTok
some meme
2-year-old.
coin that just yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that'll absolutely be the way that it goes. But anyways, like the all of humanity, aside from like people born into wealth, it took roughly most of your life to build up that type of wealth. And then all of a sudden, since roughly the dot-com era, you can do that by your 20s. And now everybody thinks if you're not a billionaire by 30, life's over. Forget it.
Yeah. It's, I don't think anybody needs $1 billion. And a lot of like I was thinking about this the other day because
Well, that's just your opinion.
yeah, it's just my opinion. I was thinking about this the other day because
They
I
need
actually
10,
I
at
took a
least 10,
motorcycle ride.
or they're
Yeah,
failures.
10 billion. I took a motorcycle ride down to like West
Wait,
Palm
was
Beach.
it was it a gold-plated Ducati? Because if it's not a
Yes,
gold-plated Ducati, it's not a motorcycle.
yes, it was. And I
Okay.
rode two of them because I just, just
And your
because.
entourage, you need to buy one for every person in
Yeah,
your entourage, right?
yes, exactly. No, I went over to like West Palm Beach Island, like literally next to Mar-a-Lago, and just started driving around through the neighborhoods there. And these are mega mega mansions. They're not one of them is less than $50 million. And it made me start thinking about this a lot, about like the type of people who live in these houses and what they do and the sort of lifestyles that they live. And it really like got to me because I was like, when you get to this level of wealth, yes, you can buy anything you want, but a lot of what your mentality goes to is like, how do I protect my wealth? Because there's so many things trying to take that away from me. And so a lot of your mentality goes towards like, how do I protect my wealth? And a lot of that ends up being with isolation. Like you look at all these houses and you can't even see the house because there's so many levels of isolation between the street and like their own property. And it's, obviously who doesn't want to be a billionaire, but there's also like, we forget that everybody has challenges, right? Whether you're a billionaire or you're in poverty, you have your own challenges. And I think billionaires have many of the same, not the same challenges, but they have equally difficult challenges. And like you have to keep making money to continue with that status. You have to protect the money that you have. You have to deal with everybody around you only wanting to be your friend for that money, right? There's so many things that we idolize these people, but it's like, is that really what the average person wants? I don't think it is necessarily.
What's funny
Plus, you
is too,
need to learn
everybody's
how
just
to.
unhappy. They're all
Uh,
unhappy. Everybody is in America. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
plus, you need to learn how to swim in a pool of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah, dude,
Which
that
is
would
hard.
seem really hard to me. I don't think, how do you like put your hand in the coins. Like,
Exactly. It's a
just float
challenge, and
on
this is a
top.
Ease to
billionaire's
dive in too
dilemma.
without breaking his
Yeah.
neck. It's impressive.
Everybody thinks being a billionaire is so easy, but I'd challenge you to go swimming like Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, on to the actual.
Yeah, I
So,
don't
people
On
who
the
actually
actual
tuned in
topic.
to find out about how to learn HTML,
We've
CSS,
been
and
busy and
JavaScript
tired.
faster.
Yeah.
Raise your
So
hand if you would like to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript faster. Because I think there are some great strategies to actually do this without, you know, like the struggle of beating your head against a keyboard and just sitting there in front of your computer nonstop. So I want to ask you guys, let's, I guess, start with HTML. We can go through each one of them, unless you have sort of general ideas, but what
I
would
have a
you
general.
say?
Oh,
Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say I have a general thing I would say, which is like, with HTML and CSS, because we do abstract away from it so much moving forward, like I think your goal should be comprehension, like being
Yeah,
able to understand what you're looking at. And because both HTML and CS, I think one of the benefits of both of those, I think, is they're very easy because they're kind of direct languages in the sense that like you're specifically doing something targeted. It's not like functions and stuff. I mean, it can be in CSS a little bit, but I
yeah,
think, just getting familiar with it, understanding what it looks like, understanding how to look things up and do it is really where your goal should be. You don't need full understanding. That comes with time and you can build
yeah,
that later. So if you're trying to do it quickly, I think it's understanding that you don't need to know everything before you move on.
yeah. I think that's a really good point. I would add a little bit to it, but like 100%, right? So like HTML and CSS, they're very basic. In like I'll speak specifically about HTML first and then CSS, right? So there's structure to HTML. It's two tags, right? It's
Yeah.
either two tags or one self-closing tag. That's really all that there is there, right? And they build the page structure. So understanding how an HTML document is structured first, like the basic structure, which you can just go to VS Code, type in an exclamation point at the top of an HTML doc. So name something like name a file index.html, put an exclamation point, and there will be an emit abbreviation that shows up in like a little taskbar. Press enter, and it'll fill out the entire document for you. That's like the
The boilerplate.
basic,
Yeah.
yeah, the boilerplate. Once you have that and you understand how that document works, all you need to do is add tags. And you don't like what you're saying is you don't need to know every tag under the sun, right? You need to understand
Yep.
how a tag works and the things that you can do with it. Like you can add classes to it, you can add IDs to it, you can add a value to it, you can add attributes to it, right? All these different things. But once you understand that, you don't need to know every single HTML tag that exists under the sun. There's probably like 10 that are used repeatedly, and then there's probably 20 that you barely ever see.
Well, I think it's also recognizing, right, that like same with HTML and CSS, it's all patterns. Like if you start to
Yeah.
recognize the patterns, it's all structurally the same, right? Or
Yeah.
syntactically the same, however you want to say it. And so once you understand that, it's a matter of just looking things up if you need it. That's all it really comes down to. So I think that kind of gives you a guideline of how much you need to know before you move on. Chris said too, like he's like, have you heard of the 80-20 rule? You just need to know 20% of the topic, do 80% of the job. It's
Yeah.
pretty
Pareto's
accurate, probably.
principle.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I would also like to suggest that as you're browsing the internet, as most of us do, get into the habit of viewing page source or particularly using developer tools, figuring out how to look at it in developer tools, because as a developer, you're going to be using developer tools quite often. But
Yeah.
if it seems overwhelming at first, you can just view the page source. And particularly when you come across websites that seem rather simple or seem like they're from the 1990s or 2000s, because those websites are still up there, people still make them, you run across them, and it can just be interesting to right click and select view page source, see what's going on there. Because all of a
Yeah.
sudden you can see exactly how they made that website. And you can start learning, oh, that's why that looks like that. Oh, look at that. They have clear text stuff in there that maybe the people shouldn't know. So like you find out all this cool stuff when doing it.
That's a good
Yeah.
point too, is
Absolutely.
looking at other people's work is a great way to start learning how to read this stuff, understand structure, and understand what you can do with it. That's like a great way to learn faster.
Yeah. I want to extend also on the CSS part of that, right? So just like HTML, you don't once you understand the structure, you can understand basically all of it. And I think when I first started learning CSS, one of the things that I struggled with was there's like HTML, there's probably like in total maybe 50 or 100 tags total, right? CSS, there's probably like 1,000 different CSS properties that you can change, right? And with each one, there's like multiple different things that you can change about it. So it can be extremely confusing. And knowing each one and how it works and what it does, and they add new ones all the time, can be very, very confusing. And when I first started doing CSS, I thought, oh, I need to learn all of these in order to call myself a web developer and be able to develop a website. And the truth is, you don't at all, because you're going to end up, even when you are an advanced web developer, you're going to end up looking some of those up sometimes because you want to do strange things with CSS and you're going to have to look that up. And that's fine. Like,
Yeah,
your
you
employer's
don't
going to
memorize
expect that
everything,
you,
right?
yeah, like you don't need to memorize it. Your employer's literally going to expect that you know how to read documentation and use it to your advantage. It's not like a test when you work for like a job as a web developer. They're not going to sit there and be like, oh no, you have to have everything memorized. You can't
Oh,
look it all up. Go ahead,
that's a
Rand.
great point because it is only a test if you want to work for one of those stupid companies, like one of the FANG companies that everybody idolizes. Like, I just want to be a developer for Google or for Netflix or Amazon. And it's just like, those are the only companies where they really will test you and make you do whiteboard activities. Most places, they just want to see that you can actually code. And if you
Yeah.
can show them that, then you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even those companies, I think they will test you. But if you were like, I don't know the CSS property for this, but I know it exists. Like, I don't know the exact name, but I know it exists and it does this. They'll probably be like, cool, he has enough, understanding to actually get the job done. We don't care if he like looks that up. Um,
But that's a good point too, which is like it's not just understanding how to read the code and like how it's supposed to look, but also just understanding what's possible.
right.
Then you know, right, that it exists. Like, and once you get familiar with it and comfortable with it, you realize like, oh, I could definitely do something like that. I just need to look
Yeah.
it up. And I mean, every developer you talk to, experienced developers, they always have documentation open because no one's going to remember all this stuff. And things change,
Exactly.
like you said, constantly. There's always new updates, new versions of stuff. So you do need it open, like, because
Yeah.
there's always going to be something new.
Yeah. I remember like a week or so ago, I was trying to build like a masonry board for like the testimonial section on our website. And I had built them before and they're fairly complex because they use like JavaScript and stuff to like figure out like spacing and all this stuff. And I was like, I wonder if there's a better way to do this. And I went and watched some YouTube video of like a pretty big like CSS YouTuber. Um, he was like, "Oh yeah, you just like do display masonry and it all just works." And I was like, "Oh, sick. Like they made this new CSS thing like super easy." And I went to use it and I was like, "This shit don't work." Like I tried it on like three different browsers and then I looked at like I forget what the website is. There's some website where you can check like what property like CSS properties work on what browsers and it was like every single browser it was like experimental does not work. And I was like, "Okay, cool." So like that's just part of being a developer is things work sometimes then they don't like everything is constantly changing. That's something you're going to realize very quickly as a developer is that all technology changes pretty much nonstop. I mean, even like this week I had a developer meeting with a company called BitBasil, right? And they're like, we're building them an NFT marketplace that's based on another marketplace. And they're showing me screenshots and they're like, and then they're like, let's look at the live website. I'll show you how it looks on the live website. They took a screenshot like a few days ago, and literally on the live website, what they took a screenshot of already changed. Like that's how fast things change, right? And
Yeah.
so getting used to that, I think, is very important. And you don't need to know every single thing because it's going to change eventually, right?
Well, actually, Bryce just said too, he said like knowing how to use resources is more important. It shows critical thinking skills versus just memorization. And I think that is essential, right? Learning critical
Yes.
thinking skills will help you so much more than anything else. And like I think one of the things too that helped me like when I first started out, like it was like a realization that like and it's easy to forget because like we interact with the front end of stuff, we're always
Yeah.
interacting with the user-facing side, so everything seems like magic. But
Yeah.
when you really think about it, right, computers are all built on ones and zeros. Everything can be broken down to these super teeny tiny little pieces that are then put together to build this thing. And once you realize that, you can start breaking things down into these super tiny components that are like, it's so easy to put them together once you realize that. Like, I
Yeah.
think thinking like that kind of thinking just takes some time. But once you realize it, you can move so much faster because you realize anything's possible. It's just breaking it down.
Yeah.
I did just remember something while you were talking about that. Now we've had some contributions from Bryce and from Chris today, and we were talking
Mm,
about how we're going to start rewarding our top contributors on Facebook. We're not going
yeah.
to tell you exactly what that is yet because it's pretty cool. But as you participate in Facebook, posting in the group, participating in the comments, commenting on other people's comments, Facebook actually keeps track of that stuff, and they let us know every month who the top contributors are in the group. So we're going to actually start rewarding the top contributors here. So if you do like getting cool stuff for free, then you should definitely consider contributing more to the group.
Yeah. So, and especially because you just get more out of the group too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very clearly obvious to me. There's like the same few people who are clearly on this live stream right now. Like, not us, we're cool, but the other cool people who are like watching. Like, you guys contribute a lot to the group, but I also, it's very obvious you guys get the most out of this group, and it's like a free resource that like you can get so much out of. It's almost silly to watch these and not contribute, right? You're just sitting in the shadows. You're like a lurker, like, hey, I'm just gonna watch you guys every Saturday, but I don't want to talk about what I'm doing because
What's
then
that? What's that?
then people might
Gollum?
judge me a little bit.
Okay, so what's that old saying? You get out of things what you put in, right? I mean, the more you put in,
Yeah.
the more you're going to get out of it, always. And also, you can ask directly questions that are specific for you to understand things better,
Yeah, and
which
like
makes
we
sense.
answer them. Like this week, Bryce was struggling with something, and I was like, "Hey, that looks like a fun project." He was building like a meme generator, and I was like, he was like struggling to figure out how to move text around, and I was like, "Hey, you know what? I spent like, you know, I don't know, 40 minutes just like rebuilding what he did because it looked fun." And yeah, Bryce said, "Do you want to learn or just watch? You need to be active to learn." Yeah. So
Yeah.
like I rebuilt it and like sent it over to him because I was like, "Hey, that looks fun." Like we actually want to help people. It's not just we're not just here to like charge people money. We actually like building this community. So contribute and you'll get a lot more out of it. And when you do contribute moving forward, we're going to reward those people who do because we like when people contribute. So uh,
Hmm.
I
Which
think we
brings
should.
us
Oh, go
back to
ahead.
you, Danny.
Okay. I was going to say, I
when
think we
did
should
this
talk.
turn
Well, let's
into a
talk about.
news report?
I don't know, but I like it. Makes me feel like we're like, the talking heads.
Next
Right? I want
next
to.
week I'm gonna be like in the rain with like an umbrella or something.
We'll do live, yeah, live reporting on the scene.
A cow fly by in the
Yeah,
background.
Oh my God.
be
But
at
yeah, I
the
was gonna
thing
say,
in
so
Florida.
what about JavaScript's a bit different, right, than HTML and CSS
Yes.
because it's a full-fledged, it's a programming language. I mean, it used to just be for, basically for making websites more interactive and interesting, but now it can do anything, right? You can do anything with JavaScript.
Yeah.
So I think that one's harder at first for people because it's definitely it's a different type of animal to wrap your head around, a regular programming language versus like these structured type of programming languages like CSS and HTML. So
Yeah.
what are you guys' recommendations for how to learn these things quicker? Yeah.
I
Go ahead,
have one.
Randall.
All right. So I think a lot of people get distracted by the shiny object syndrome when they're learning.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to go from one project to another project to a different programming language to this, to that, to whatever. And while it's cool and it's fun, it takes away from your ability to learn. So being able to actually follow through and complete an entire project is going to be super helpful, especially if one, you design the project yourself and you're struggling through, so you have to learn things. But also, if you don't, you can go through other people's projects, follow along, and then make it your own at the end. And what I would also recommend, something that I've always found works for me to learn, is doing the same project over and over again until I
Mm.
understand it. And I'm using this right now studying for the OSCP, is we have to basically hack these boxes, and I'll do it once and I'll struggle through it for hours and hours and hours. And then I'll do it again and I'll do it again until it's just automatic and I can remember exactly how I got the initial foothold, exactly how I elevated privileges, exactly how I did the lateral movement, all these different things. So then it becomes more ingrained. And I remember one time we were talking, I think in one of our web dev incubators, and you were talking about Russ, you were talking about how long it took you to actually uh, get the get comfortable with React, and was doing a lot of projects in React before you actually
Yeah.
felt comfortable. And that's something that as a beginner, it's hard to wrap your head around, because you do one or two half projects and then you feel defeated because you don't get it. And the guy who
Yeah.
made the video, it seems like he's just flying through it and it's so easy for him and you're
Yeah.
never going to get
Totally.
it. But like recognizing from experienced developers that it takes tens, dozens of projects before you actually feel comfortable enough to you can do it on your own and really not have to worry about it.
I think
Yeah.
the other thing, no, that's a really good point. I think repetition and just doing projects is one of the best ways, hands down, to learn without question. Because books and stuff, like you're only gonna get the basics. You're not gonna get
Yeah.
real world problems you have to solve, right? And it's interesting too. I also think with like JavaScript too is like, and any programming languages, it's you want to jump from one to the next because it feels good because you're learning like the basics again, like variables and stuff, and it feels you're making progress fast. But the reality is once you learn one programming language, they're all the same. All the changes is the syntax. So you can
Yeah.
learn any other. So you're much better off picking one, focusing on it, learning it, and then if you need to know another one, you'll pick it up. It's not hard. That's why like a lot of jobs you'll see, they'll say like, you know, a programming language like Python, C, HT,
Yeah.
or JavaScript, whatever. They'll list a ton because they
You
don't
need
care. If you
specific
know
one.
one,
Yeah.
yeah, you know any.
And they know that you can pick it up pretty quick if you know one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like when I first started learning React, it was a struggle because
Oh, it's super confusing, right?
it's
It's
it
like,
seems super confusing.
yeah,
Now I'm like, wow, this is so much better than anything else. And I think, one of the things that's particularly confusing about it is whatever the phrase is, like there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, right? There's like when you go to actually develop a website in React, there's 1,000 different ways to actually build it, and they all come out looking the same and functioning the same, but the code may be wildly different,
yeah,
right? Like like just one example of that is when you're doing asynchronous functions, you can use promises or you can use async await. Like those two things they do the same thing, but the syntax for them is wildly different. And I remember when I first started learning that, I would see one person use it this way, one person do it this way. And it was sometimes more confusing than it is clarifying, because you're like, why is somebody choosing this method or that method? And what you're saying with repetition, I think, is so important, because you could look at each of those individually and say, I only did two projects and one does it this way, one does it this way, and I don't understand the difference. But as you repeat and do more and more projects and code more, I think is really the important thing, is like do your own things. You start to realize what works best for you and what you like the best. Like I don't like using promises because it's extra syntax and it doesn't, to me, the verbiage doesn't make as much sense as async await. Like it's just like an asynchronous function. I'm awaiting for this to finish before I keep moving down the file, versus like a promise and like how that promise is resolved. And like it just doesn't make sense logically as much for me. But that's something you learn as you go through this like development process, is what do I like? Because you're the developer. You get to choose how you're actually going to develop this and make this project. So I totally agree with that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was I made a post earlier this week about JavaScript. So if you're trying to learn JavaScript, like literally just look through that post, because it has the essential parts of JavaScript. If you understand each of those things, and it's a graphical sort of visual thing. If you understand those things, you understand 80% of JavaScript. You really do.
yeah.
It's
It's
just
just putting those things
on them,
together.
yeah, and
Yeah.
putting them together in different ways that serve different functions and like do different things. There's a few parts that are like not in there that are more advanced topics, like async await and like event handlers and things like that. But that's the core of it, and it's not that much. Like when you talk about programming languages, it's variables, it's like data structures,
Well,
functions. Like it's there's not that much to it.
well, that's what's funny. I noticed that when we started learning, like it felt like the amount was so high when we first started,
Yeah.
especially trying to learn programming, like programming languages. And I remember like it was like I forget when, but like it just dawned on me. It was the same thinking as like you can break all these things down to little parts. It's the same with the logic and stuff. It's all stuff you use over and over again, and then really the more complex projects you build, you're just combining these logical things together to get to the
Exactly.
point. That's all it is. So if you understand the little parts, you just put it together. And like sometimes, yes, I think reading other people's code is a great way because you start to see this and you start to learn
Yeah.
how they're structuring it, which can help you think later in the future. But I think a lot of us take so long to learn these things because we stall ourselves from moving forward. So we think we
Yeah.
have to know everything rather than just trying something that might be a little bit beyond our scope at the present, but that's where we're going to learn the most. And also realize that we're competent enough to do it. That
Yeah.
gives us that confidence, like completing it. It might take us a little while, but like it makes you feel good and like feel like a developer when you complete a project fully.
Totally. I wanted to say Bryce wrote, I've bought a few books that provide projects to work on so I can get some experience with projects. They're clearly not going to be the same level as real projects, but you have to be familiar with easier stuff before you can do the complex. And I agree with that. I think there is a lot of value though in having your own projects and doing things
Yeah.
that you want to build for a couple reasons. Number one is the motivation factor. Like you are going to be wildly more motivated if it's something that you want to build versus you just building something in a book, right? And also the other thing is when you're building things in a book, they're usually structured in a way that makes them very easy, or like there's a straightforward method to like getting to the completed state of that. Like it's like build a I use this example way too much, but build like a to-do app, right? A to-do list app. Like that's something you might find in a book. But when you want to build something on your own, like Chris is building a Sudoku solver, right? That's not straightforward. And you're going to run into a lot of challenges with that are going to expand your awareness outside of like, okay, how do I add, something to a list and then take that away? And the solutions for the Sudoku solver are probably similar to the to-do list, but the complication of that and just having that complexity of like, okay, this isn't just a simple app, um, take you to a whole nother level. On top of all of that, it's just like an employer is going to look at those two things and like, did you get something out of a book? That doesn't look as good as like, hey, I was really passionate about X, Y, and Z, and I made an app that solves that problem for people. Go ahead,
I
Danny.
will say there are some books that have some like I will say a Python Crash Course has some that guy has like some of the best projects in the back I think for when you're
Yeah.
first learning and he goes from beginning to end actually
Yeah.
putting them out, which I think was like you rarely find that. So I would say that those are rare cases where the books are really good.
And
But
I am
one of
trying
the
to
things,
say like those are important in the
no,
beginning,
yeah,
right? But
but
like
you
you
want to build
do
your own
want to
stuff,
get to
obviously.
the point where you're building your own stuff. Yeah.
One of the things that I did that I think was really helpful was I used that as a guide and then built my own project. So I would follow along
Right.
basically
Yeah.
with the book so that I knew that I was like, okay, so this is how I'm installing the stuff, setting my dependencies, doing this. But I
Yeah.
would, so the book would be like my guide, but I would build something
Yeah.
completely different. And I think that's a great way to do it too, because you have that security of this resource there that's giving you the step by step, but you're doing something totally different with it. So you're going to run into new problems. And I think that's a great way to kind of go about it too.
Yeah. Before we get into any questions, because if you guys do have questions, start throwing them in the comments there because we're happy to answer some of those before we
What
sign
I
off
got.
here. But
Yeah.
one thing that you did make me think of, which I think is a good point too, is when you're building projects, and again, like I think one of the fastest ways to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or any programming language is to actually just code. And I think a lot of people think like you're going to learn
Yeah.
by reading books or whatever. You're not. You have to just code over and over and over. It's repetition. But one of the things that helped me a lot was when I was first starting out was basically having two projects open at a time, one that I was building and one that I previously built. So I
Oh,
can
do
look
that all
back
the
at
time.
my
Yeah.
previous code and be like, oh, that's how I did that. Because you waste a lot of time in like, okay, like for example, React, routing in React, like going between pages sucks because you have to use React Router DOM and it sucks. It's very confusing to use and it's just not a good technology. That's why like that's one of the main advantages in my opinion about Next.js. But
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
when I remember when I was doing a lot of React routing, like setting that up sucked. So I would just go back and have like one project open that I already built that whole thing on and just look at that and be like, oh, that's how I do it.
Oh,
Not copy paste it, but have it as reference, right? So when I
that's
was confused, go ahead,
I
Danny.
was
Yeah.
gonna say no. That's the thing though, is I think when you do that, or if you have open like documentation, where a lot of documentation now will have like templates, don't
Yeah.
copy and paste it when you're first learning. Type it out for your thing.
Yes.
So instead, like a lot of times you'll copy and paste and just change what you need to. Instead, write the whole thing out because that forces you to get that muscle memory and to do that repetition, which helps. And I think you just learn way faster doing than you do just like,
Yeah.
not. I mean, that's always the case, right?
Yeah. And definitely in programming because
Yeah.
it is a lot of muscle memory. It's a lot of like just remembering the things that you've done in the past, and you only can enforce that by actually coding. So
Yeah.
um so yeah,
Yeah.
if anybody has any questions, throw them in there real quick because we're already over time here. Um but
While we're waiting for those, we could
oh
let everybody know who's interested because we do offer a premium red carpet service for people who are interested in just paying a little bit. It's in the beta right now, but cool thing is within the next couple months, we should be out of beta, which is cool for us, maybe not so cool for you because the price is going to be going up a lot. But
yeah.
what we do is we help you become a web developer, particularly a paid web developer in a year or less. And how we do that? Well, a lot of the things we discussed today, like working on personal projects where you can learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, but also so that you can become a better developer. We're there to help you when you have problems so you can see what it's like to actually develop stuff. And then we teach you how to actually get work while you're working with us. But if you want to go and work for one of those big companies that we talked about earlier, guess what? You'll have these things in your portfolio so you can show them, say, hey, look what I built, not just another to-do app. So if you are interested in that, Russell, back to you. Where can they go find it?
They can go to codenoobs.io/mentoring, or you can just drop like a little comment down below that just says HTML, and we'll reach out to you, give you all the
Yeah.
information you want to know. If you're just curious too, like we're happy to jump on an action call with you and let you know a little bit more about the program, how we can help you. What are you laughing at, Randall?
Like if you're considering buying and you're like buy curious, just
Yeah,
drop us a line
if you're like
below.
buy curious and you're just curious about what it's like to buy, then you can
Uh,
reach out to us and we'll get on an action call with you and, you know, have a therapy session about your bi curiosity. And
Arrested Development throwback there. That was such a good
Right.
show.
yeah, but seriously,
Uh,
yeah, we're honestly, this is probably one of the best programs that you can find in development. I know a lot of people love this idea of like taking a boot camp, but the reality is this, like if you go to a boot camp, they're going to teach you a bunch about like a
Chris had a
little bit
question.
about a bunch of different topics, and you're going to feel probably more confused afterwards. Our whole goal is to sort of guide you, like, through the process of going from not understanding anything to um, understanding everything you need to know and just the things that you need to know to actually become a paid web developer. So, um, there is a question here. Chris says, your favorite free hosting sites for a personal portfolio, especially if not GitHub pages. You recommend buying a domain? I'm thinking about it. So I'll answer that one first. So yes, I definitely recommend buying a domain. You can usually get like
Yeah.
your name, um, or something similar to your name for pretty cheap, right? Because it's such like an obscure domain name. So yeah, like I would definitely recommend getting your own domain. It just looks more professional when you can set like because that happens to me all the time when people want to see my work. Like I have a meeting on Monday to talk with some people about doing work for them, and they're like, "Can you just send me over, your GitHub and like your portfolio?" And I can send over myname.com or something similar. That looks very professional. So I would definitely go with that. And it
I
usually
would say
domains
too,
about
randomly generated
$18.
ones too are usually all like wonky with like,
Yeah,
when you
and
get
it's
a
to
free
be like
one.
XYZ2497 at
Yeah, it could be like
netlify.app,
6
something like
pages
that.
long.
Yeah. Um, and so yeah, and then the other thing is like in terms of hosting, so there's a couple different options. I know you're asking about free. There are paid options out there. Um, what are you shaking your head at?
I would
Don't
say if you can, because with these websites, you're going to be presenting yourself. So if
Yeah.
you can spend a little bit of money on hosting, you're going to have a much
Yeah.
better performing website. So
Yeah.
when they search yourname.com, it's not going to take 5 minutes for the website to load. It's going to load
Yeah.
immediately.
I
And
think
so that it just kind of gives off an air of I know what I'm doing. And
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit, honestly, on the hosting because I'll be honest, like a few years ago that was true, but I have used some like cheap hosting that like cheap paid hosting that was pretty bad. Um, and like I'm not gonna say names because there's a ton of different ones out there. You have to buy like pretty good hosting for it to be fast. The other thing I would say is there are free options that are actually pretty fast, which is um like Firebase offers really fast free hosting. I know Netlify is pretty fast too. I don't know if you can do a custom domain. I haven't like extensively used Netlify because I just have this huge preference for Firebase. Like I think it's a great service and it works really well and it's for the most part
And
free.
also the free tier is insane. Like you don't start
Yeah.
you have to have a card linked to it because you do get charged based on usage, but you have to
Yeah.
hit like an insanely high number that your portfolio is just not going to hit.
Yeah.
Like
But either way, like whether you go with paid or free, I think um like you do want to just make sure that it's fast. So test your website when you do it because there are free options and there are paid options that are both slow and fast. And you may want to just like get recommendations. I personally like Firebase. I don't know how easy it is to integrate that with like a vanilla HTML, CSS. I'm pretty sure you could fairly easily. And you can go through their documentation to see how to do that. But yeah, and then like I know Netlify is another popular one, but there's a bunch of them out there. I don't think any particular ones are better. Chris also said setting up DNS for your own domain and throwing it on GitHub pages seems straightforward. I certainly don't want a sluggish host. Firebase is another option to consider. Yeah, I know a lot of people use GitHub pages too, so you can try that as well. Um, Ultimately, again, it's an experiment. You get to practice these things as a developer, and it's like every. I had this conversation with my girlfriend the other day, and I don't want to keep going too much longer, but she was like, she wanted to add some font to Canva, and she was like, I was going to ask you to do it, but it seemed like, something that like would take away from like your time coding and stuff like that. And so she just hired somebody to do it. And I was like, that's awesome. Like I'm glad you just like found somebody to do it quick, but don't ever think that like asking me to code something is harming me because it's always teaching me something new. And as a developer, our every skill set that I can add, no matter how tiny it is or like any amount of time that it like takes for me to learn actually benefits me because like once I learn that then I can offer that as a service to anybody. I can be like, yeah, I know how to add a font to Canva using like custom code, right? So as a developer it's in your best interest to always take on any challenge and be like, you know what, I'm gonna like we constantly seek to get other people's advice, which is good, but like actually just go out and do it. Like build it on GitHub pages, try paid hosting and try Firebase and see which one you like the best, you know? Yeah,
yeah,
like AWS also has pretty free or like, you're paying cents for hosting. Bryce is
it's also
saying.
good to learn them too. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
just
so,
learn
like
how they work. You know.
exactly like you're you know, you end up building a skill set that you can get paid for down the line. So always just experiment with that. All right,
That's
any
it. All right.
final words? Thank you
Nope.
guys again for tuning in. If you are in the web dev incubator, we will see you in about 15 minutes because we ran long today. But thank you guys for tuning in. Great questions. We will see you next week. Keep contributing. If you look at Bryce, some of his comments say rising contributor, which shows you that he's rising in the ranks. So if you want to get some free stuff down the road, make sure that you're contributing as well. Now they're all like, thanks.
Yeah,
Hi,
everything,
emoji,
everything.
emoji.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next week, Saturday at 9 a.m. for another one.
Later.
Peace.